Hello, viewers. Welcome to our program on immigration and you. I am your immigration attorney, Michael Fulwani, and once again, we have with us my partner, David Nachman. David, welcome.
Thanks so much, Michael.
So, in today's program, let us first start about the cutoff dates for the month of March 2014. In the family preference categories, the first preference, which is for the unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, advances by 4 weeks to February 1, 2007. The family 2A category, which is for the spouses and children under the age of 21 of green card holders, unfortunately no movement. Date remains the same, September 8, 2013. And just want to say a word about this category, that this category has moved when there was a waiting period of almost 4 years to September 2013, and there are a lot of cases now because they have advanced so much that they have to process and do not expect any kind of movement in this maybe for rest of the year at least. That's the way the prediction is. The family 2B category, which are the sons and daughters over the age of 21 of the green card holders, advances by 7 weeks to September 1, 2006. And the family third preference, which are the married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, advances by 4 weeks to June 15, 2003. The family fourth preference, which are the brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens, advances by 2 weeks to November 8, 2001. Now, for the employment preference categories, the first preference, which is the priority workers, are current for all the countries, including India. The family second preference, which are the advanced degree holders, is current for most of the countries except India. For India, unfortunately, there is no movement. Date remains the same, November 15, 2004. The employment third preference, which are the professionals and skilled workers, advances by 8 weeks. 8 weeks for all the countries other than India. And for India, it advances by 2 weeks,
2 weeks
only,
yep,
to September 15, 2003. Now, when David comes to comments, he'll explain why is that so, that we see the advancement coming for other countries, quickly as compared to India, either being, frozen there or very small movements. And the EW other worker category is the same like employment third preference, 8 weeks advance movement to September 1, 2012, and for India 2 weeks to September 15, 2003. The employment fourth preference, the religious workers, the priests and other religious workers, is current for all the countries. And the employment fifth preference, which is for the investors of $1 million or $500,000 in the EB-5 program, is current for all the countries. Your comments?
Well, Michael, I don't know if I can specifically address the issue that you raised because obviously we've told our viewers in the past that a lot of this has to do with factors that are sort of beyond our control. It has to do with supply and demand on an annual basis and actually on a monthly basis. Yeah. And Charles Oppenheimer for the U.S. Department of State is making determinations based upon a variety of factors which you can take a look at if you go online to the Department of State website, and you can see the factors that are being used to make the determination as to when these priority dates become current.
So my question is this, that for the employment preference categories, the date is same movement and they are the same dates for all the countries in the world, most of them I would say, the family preference categories. But in employment, you see that other countries other than India are far, far in advance of the India or maybe China or some other countries. So look at this, let's say right, employment third preference and employment second preference. So employment second preference is current for all the countries, current. Mm-hmm. And India is stuck in November 2004.
That's right. And the reason why is because it's highly charged and there's so many people who want to come in.
No, I think that the other issue really is a per country limit.
It's a quota. It's a quota.
Quota per country. I mean, there are limits overall limits,
Exactly.
so many numbers and how they have to be allocated each country.
That's exactly
But there's
right.
another provision called a per country limit, means but no country should exceed so many people. Now, unfortunately, India comes in that cap, the per country limit. Other countries, because they are not using enough anyway. So that is one of the main problems. And we have been talking, we have been lobbying, we have been always saying, and the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill also has a
Exactly.
provision to remove this per country. What is it? I mean, should be all the countries should be placed in the same situation. Why? Because this is a heavy, serious problem. 12 and 4. I mean, the person is born in any country other than India, then he is almost current. Almost 12 is not bad at all, another year or so.
That's right, Michael. I mean, as you properly point out, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill that they're talking about right now does have provisions in it to potentially eliminate these backlogs and the way that it doesn't fairly address the quotas for these
Yes,
other
yeah,
countries.
right.
But we don't know what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, so let's hope for that the CIR may pass, or even if the CIR doesn't get passed, there may be separate bills coming in. And there are some of the issues, and we're going to talk about the CIR. You said there were some hearings of the subcommittee. Let's talk about that.
Before we do that, I think there are two other comments which we usually make in our discussions when we're discussing the visa numbers. One is, don't forget about cross-chargeability. Cross-chargeability is extremely important and a very, very powerful tool that you can use, or someone in your family or friends can use, to advance those priority dates. So if you're married to an individual who is not from India or not from one of those backlog countries, if you're married to someone, let's say from Bangladesh, from Nepal, then of course you'll be able to use the priority dates that apply in the all foreign.
Even if the applicant is born in India, the wife is born in Nepal or Bangladesh or Afghanistan, any of those countries.
Correct.
Then the principal applicant, the husband, can take the place of the wife's country of birth and then utilize that benefit of the quota.
Exactly. And one additional item which we also have talked about, and I have to say that I've seen an incredible uptick in the last few weeks in individuals who have locked in their EB2 cases and they have their priority dates, and what they're doing is they're sprucing up their resumes to go for that EB1. And so we've seen a lot of very, very impressive academic and experiential credentials that they're giving to us, new resumes with all of this additional information to try to get them into the EB1 category where those cases are current and they can immediately apply for the green card. So if you feel that that might be a possibility where you've locked in an EB2 priority date but you have the ability to possibly go for that EB1, send us a resume, send a resume for an evaluation, and we'll be able to give you an assessment as to whether or not you might qualify for an EB1.
So, David, let us say if I was an illegal alien and I come to you and I say apply for EB1 for me, you think I will qualify for EB1?
Probably not on that basis.
Okay.
But if you've locked in an EB2 and you have a good resume, then for that particular purpose, you may want to try to think about whether or not you can bump yourself into the higher category.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, there's another subject we want to talk about today is an H-1B visas. Now, this whole discussion...
Well, did you want to discuss comprehensive immigration reform before
let's
we
do
get
that
on to
first.
that? Yeah,
Fine.
because I think that there were two very important developments this week. There were two hearings before the House subcommittee. There were House subcommittee hearings.
Correct.
There was one House subcommittee hearing which dealt with the president's power in being able to exercise his discretion. And I think that that was a really important development because essentially what was going on is that I think that the president's power was being put under the limelight, because I think that what happened was the House is afraid that the president may, if the House doesn't act on immigration, go forward and act without the House. So I think that they wanted to kind of focus on what the president can and can't do.
See, lot of immigrant groups, and us also, I would say, we are disappointed to some extent with our president. I mean, initially when he started campaign promises and also pushing the immigration bill, for the last few months I see he has been pretty quiet. And there's a question raised from the immigrant groups also. Why doesn't he strongly push for it and go after the members of the Congress, the Democrats, and also more meetings with the Republicans, and trying to, make some kind of a compromise. So that's one thing. The other thing also, what you said, a lot of groups are talking about the same thing, that, okay, he did a pretty good job in coming out with some of the memorandums, which was the advance, waivers
prosecutorial discretion.
Prosecutor advance, like in advance.
Well, you had
permission.
DACA, you had the military families, and so the president is acting without Congress.
No, but he has, after that, nothing has happened. So now the talk is going on. Why doesn't the president go forward and come with more memorandums? And remember last time, somewhere we were talking about, and we mentioned this thing, that one suggestion I gave is that one of the easiest simple thing is whatever administration can do without passing the law, without going to the Congress, the president should do it. For example,
well, he should, Michael, but here's the thing is that remember that the president also has to moderate his power, and he has to understand that it looks better for the president if he can get both houses together and to compromise. So he's going to back off. And you recall during the State of the Union address, actually right before the State of the Union address, the House specifically asked the president not to get too aggressive about the immigration issue, because they said, if you do, then we're not going to act on it. So they were trying to assert their leverage over the presidential power.
But what I'm saying, I give an example. Without being aggressive, he can do something very nicely, which is strictly within his powers and the most reasonable, and nobody's going to question about that. It's about the children that are left out.
Dreamers. Dreamers.
No, not the dreamers. In the I-130s file for the parents, with the family third or a fourth preference, the visa number comes in, where the parents get the visa, but children are left out.
Family reunification.
Because they sometimes the child may qualify under Child Status Protection Act, so that is fine. Then the child can come with the parents. But there are cases where the child has crossed 21, and even then the children could not get because the CSPA benefit was not available. So there have been some court cases.
It's currently being addressed by the U.S. Supreme Court.
The issue is there. But what I'm saying, there have been some court cases where the courts have said that when the parents file an I-130 after coming to the U.S., those children should be given this old priority date, that of the parents. Or if the parent now files an I-130, they should go back and approve that I-130 with the old priority date. So this is something where the president is not gone completely out of the way. This is on the table. Courts have held it. It is reasonable. So he could say to the USCIS that I think that's a good policy change. And we can administratively, it's not even a policy change. It's an administratively, kind of taking an action that they should have done a long time ago, in my opinion, to implement those court decisions.
And Michael, I agree.
What says David Nachman?
I agree 150% with you. However, as you know, politics is a very strange thing. And as a result, we know, having studied U.S. politics, that there is something called the separation of powers. And because the U.S. Supreme Court is addressing the issue, if the president were to exercise his discretion, unfortunately, that would be deemed, at least by the government, as an interference with the judicial branch. So because of politics, I think the president is backing off that particular issue. But I think if anywhere there's a place to exercise good discretion in the general interest of humanitarianism, that's the place to do it.
Point well taken, David. I was only thinking, God forbid, if the Supreme Court doesn't agree on this, then that will be a big problem.
Well, then something might happen.
But if he announces discretionary, then I don't think the Supreme Court will say that he has no authority, the administration has no authority to accept the previous court decisions. But anyway, I think we should pray God and hope for the best. Either it happens administratively or it happens by the decision of the Supreme Court. So we will let you know as soon as some developments take place on this issue. Very, very important. I know a lot of you are concerned and worried about that, and we are with you and we are praying for this to happen. David, we are running out of time, and we thank you very much for coming on the program, and we thank all of you for watching the program. Please keep watching us every Saturday and Sunday on ITV and
thanks so much,
Vision Avisha. Thank you very much.
Thanks.